Hi, and welcome to Condemned and Happy, a podcast for people experiencing religious trauma and those who care for them. My name is Ray, and I'm a survivor of religious trauma. Kim, who is a pastor in the ELCA, has been reading over the 2025 plan for leadership that can be found on the Heritage Foundation's website. Kim, what are your initial thoughts on what you've been reading so far?
Thank you, Ray. My initial response to this document is that it is a fevered dream of individuals who do not value religious diversity and would seek to change our Constitution's stated goal of keeping religion and politics separate. By implementing a system of laws that favor Christian nationalism and the Christian right over other forms of religion. This would, in essence, end religious freedom. For LGBTQIA plus individuals, they are particularly at risk of losing rights, freedoms, and job opportunities. In short, the types of beliefs that have traumatized people leaving high-demand churches would be legalized and supported through the legislature. If we had a Supreme Court of the United States that was not partisan, we might have a way of stopping the legislation, but that is unlikely given the makeup of the current court and given their current rulings, especially on presidential immunity. I cannot emphasize enough how important the 2024 election is. If the GOP is empowered, the Heritage Foundation will be the vetting system on who is sent to the White House, what their goals are in the White House. They are explicitly saying they want a loyalty pledge from people they send to the White House, not to the Constitution of the United States, but to the president's demands and this plan. So the document is comprised of many parts written by many different people. There is a summary before each section that highlights the goals in that section. Then the document goes into detail on how the administration can implement their goals and bypass Congress. Now, there is a disclaimer that not all conservatives agree with every bit of the document, but do not let that fool you into empowering these people. They are the same ones who said Roe v. Wade was settled law. And here is what is tricky about this plan. They don't expect the majority of the US population to read it. They don't even expect that it will be read by the majority of lawmakers in Congress or candidates running for office. They plan on having their true believers read this document, being in the houses and the offices and the ears of the lawmakers, and using their influence to enact these laws. So even if you have a candidate who doesn't sign off on these items or all of them, that is not a safeguard against stopping some of the more extreme parts of the agenda that they want to implement.
It's not even like we a lot of people believe this and we want to push what we collectively believe. It's we want to manipulate behind the scenes because our ideas aren't popular.
Exactly. These are not popular ideas, and they don't care that they're not popular. When I look at the document, like on page XIII, so 3 I's, is a section called Note on the Project 2025, and it begins like an old Uncle Sam wants you commercial by saying, "We want you." The 2024 Presidential Transition Project is the conservative movement's unified effort to be ready for the next conservative administration to govern at 12 noon, January 20th, 2025. So they're really aggressive on this. 2 sentences later, they state, one set of eyes reading these passages will be the 47th president of the United States. We hope every other reader will join in making the incoming administration a success. The next paragraph states, for conservatives to have a fighting chance to take the administrative state and reform our federal government, they must work to start now. The final paragraph.
What do they mean by the administrative state?
They don't really define that very well. So that's just something that's going to have to be talked about some more. But
do they really mean they want to take over the state? It's kind of what they mean.
Yeah.
And
so
it's that boogeyman of the deep state, but in essence, they're the deep state if there is a deep state.
Right. And so what reminds me is Heather Cox Wilson Richardson was talking at one point in time, and I can't quote a direct source. I don't know if it was her book or one of her chats or one of her letters thing. So, but she talks about how previously, before, I don't know, like the turn of the century, people who got into government were cronies.
Yeah.
And they ruled the different departments of state.
Yep.
And that was the administrative state.
Yep.
But once you get a more complex civilization, you need experts in those areas. And that's how many of these groups started, is you could make a presidential appointment, but then you had the civil servants working who were experts in their field. And they could advise and kind of say, that's not going to work. So I think when they say administrative state, they want to go back to cronyism, because Trump really got pissed off when people told him he couldn't do something.
Yeah.
And this entire plan gets rid of everybody who says, no, you can't pepper spray or send the National Guard or the American Army against protesters. So I think that's what's going on, but they don't really state it. And when I talk about Christian nationalism, they specifically have a view of Christianity that is white supremacist. Instead of men and women equally, it's women dependent on men. And we'll get down to more of that later on, because he gets a little bit more explicit later on. But it's very much a view of Christianity that is not recognizable to my form of Christianity, which is the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. We don't impose our beliefs on other people. So you're welcome to come to church. You're welcome to be part of the community. You're welcome to question. You're welcome to have concerns. You're welcome to do all that. And we raise kids by teaching them what we believe. But nobody forces the kids to stay in the church in its entirety. It legislates a type of Christianity that is more akin to the far right Christian groups that want to believe in rapture, believe in end of the world, want to protect and preserve the United States through morality. Not in essence through what we teach, which is, you learn about Jesus and you try and model your life on Jesus. So it's less about being holier than thou and more about a relationship and community with others along the way. So if that's the difference, it's still one of the hard things about trying to define Christianity is that love is nebulous. It's easier to define what you're against than it is to define what you're for. And so for progressive churches, because we don't define what we're against, because we're basically like, if we're against something, it's don't harm other people. It's pretty simple. But it doesn't give you a lot of airwaves, or there's
not a lot of political hay and money that you can make off that message.
No, we are not the mega churches. And we're not the prosperity gospel, because we don't preach that if you're faithful, God will give you a Cadillac. We think that's BS. We don't preach anything that people really want to hear. We preach God is love, and your job is to love your neighbors. Not that's it. Love and serve your neighbors. You are God's hands and feet and mouth in this world. That doesn't win you a Nobel Prize. It's not going to get you a lot of money, and it's not going to make your church a huge, powerful organization.
If it does anything, it might get you crucified.
Exactly.
You're going to piss off a lot of really rich and powerful people.
Essentially, yes. For Lutherans in particular, and particularly ELCA and how we're trained, nationalism is a red flag. Because in Nazi Germany, the evangelical church, the Lutherans, were part and parcel to some of the crimes that were committed against the 12 million people killed
Hmm.
in the Holocaust. There are a few shining examples of people who bucked the system and helped people.
Yeah.
And those shining examples are who we read
Hmm.
and who we're trained to be like in our
Hmm.
seminaries. One thing to think about too with Christianity is it's not meant to be a nationalistic religion.
Yeah. Jesus
You know,
said, if my servants were of this world, they'd have swords and fight.
yeah,
Well, I messed
exactly.
that verse up, but he said if we would fight if his kingdom was on earth.
Right. You know, we don't die, we don't fight.
Yeah.
We don't, the early Christians were pacifists. And there's some debate whether that was because to be part of the army, you had to take a pledge to that someone else was God
Mm.
or not. But, you know, it was not a movement of
Political violence.
political violence. It was a resistance movement to prevent and learn to heal from the political violence being done to you, because the
What
Roman Empire was not kind to Jewish people who were not citizens and did not have rights.
one of the things I think when we think about Christianity and nationalism that like ties into this is that Christianity grew like crazy after the death of Christ, after the resurrection. And it grew very quickly. And there was a lot of like really interesting, powerful people and thought leaders. And there was a lot of knowledge going around. And then it got co-opted into the Roman Catholic Church and became political, and that all
Well,
shut down.
it gets co-opted because of Constantine,
Yes.
you know, whose mom is said to be a Christian and he's raised in some type of Christianity. But once it becomes the state religion,
Yes.
then there's always corruption with that. You're
Yeah.
always going to have some type of corruption when the powerful are trying to get away with expanding the empire, or when you're trying to say who's in and who's out.
Yeah.
Um,
Because it's politics, it's people fighting, it's not religion, and it's not a faith. It's not powerful. It loses the substance of what makes a faith powerful, because it's just people throwing sand at each other,
yeah,
essentially fighting over the sandbox.
yeah, and trying to make your way because you want to be important. You know,
Hmm.
what do? You either put someone else down or you come up with some new idea, or you say, "Oh, I got the true message here."
Yeah.
And, you know,
God
that's
has told
all.
me that you all need to give me a lot of money and make me very powerful.
Yeah, I have never preached that.
Yeah.
And something to be mindful of is you can do some Google research on this and find out who funds the Heritage Foundation,
Mm.
because that's very interesting.
Mhm.
Not only who they fund, but then you can see connections between the Supreme Court leaders and justices and the Federalist Society and far right folks.
Mm.
So I'm not going to name names because I don't want to get sued. Everyone go ahead and do your own research on this. Find out who these people are who are funding this. Getting back to the final paragraph in the, what I'm doing is kind of the foreword, and this is page XIII in the small letters. The final paragraph on this page indicates that the Heritage Foundation gave incoming President Ronald Reagan a mandate for leadership that, quote, literally put the conservative movement and Reagan on the same page, end quote. So this is important because in the section entitled A Promise to America, they made the claim that the Heritage Foundation gave Reagan 2,000 policies that the conservatives at the time wanted passed, and by the end of 1981, 60% had passed. It's important to remember that Reagan brought us trickle-down economics, which give tax breaks to the wealthy, decimating school funding, mental health services, and the welfare state. Hunger in the US dramatically increased under these policies, and we saw that the middle class began to shrink while the wealthier got even wealthy.
I want to pause and just make a mention to one of the things that Reagan instituted was the ending of higher education being relatively inexpensive.
Yes,
The Pell Grants and the student loans came out of this.
right.
So all of the people that talk about, I paid for it when I was young. It was much cheaper because then Reagan changed that, and they literally planned that kids would value their education more if they were a slave to it, if they were economically enslaved to their education.
So when the Pell Grant started, in a public university, if you got a Pell Grant, you got about 70 to 80%
Mm-hmm.
of your tuition covered.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to college in 1990.
Yep.
By that point in time, it covered 40% of a public school education.
Mhm.
Okay, so this is 9 years after Reagan stops that.
Yep.
Because then education, just in order to make ends meet, they had to supplement. And you saw this not only in higher education, but you saw it with public schools.
Yep.
You saw it with the increase in taxes on your property taxes and school taxes.
Yep.
All of it went up because the federal government stepped back. And
they wanted it to step back.
And they wanted it to step back because the wealthy people want to have more wealth.
They were afraid what what educated people would be like, and they wanted them to be bought into the system that they were selling.
They wanted people to be hungry and uneducated, and they got it.
Yeah.
Because again, in 78, there were 200 food pantries throughout the US. There's over 40,000 as of 2000.
And they're full and they need your support.
Yes.
They don't have enough food to give out.
So not only this, but they instead of, I lived through this. And as a child, every meal we had the news on. So it was watching MASH and the news. When FDR took over and started some of the welfare stuff, one of his comments was, if you work a full-time job in America, you should not be poor.
Yeah.
And these folks totally undid that.
Yep.
But they fought against raising the minimum wage. They fought against rent control. They fought against expanding public housing because it's wasteful, it's corrupt, yada, yada, yada. And then they fought against increasing school fund, or TANF, which is what's now TANF, but the whole food and economic stuff. So they made the poor from deserving to moochers.
Yep.
And started calling them welfare queens. If you have ever needed to utilize the welfare system, it has never been just. It really doesn't ever, it's not set at a rate that's economical. Somebody is considered poor if they make $15,000 or under.
Yeah.
You can't buy a car for 15 grand. You can't, you can't rent anywhere.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's never stayed with the cost of living. And it's intentional because a group of people who've been elected into power have said, oh no, it's against our philosophy, our party, to vote for these legislation things that would help people. And I've watched it my entire life. So to give you an example, I went to the same college that my hometown pastor went to. So he went in 1960. He spent his summers painting houses, and he earned enough money to pay for tuition, room and board, all of his books, everything. We earned the same amount of money over the summer, and that basically paid for books.
Yeah.
So everything else was loans. It was Pell Grants because my parents didn't own a house. So at that point in time, there were no resources for college for me. I have no problem with people getting their loans forgiven because I know too many people who were in my generation or slightly behind me not only have paid back their loans, but the compound interest rates their loans have increased faster than they could repay them. So,
and if you're gonna take the Bible verse, the borrower is servant to the lender, and criticize loaning people money, then you should be against, we should have all student loans forgiven. It's
I would
biblical.
love, I would just love to see some of the Jubilee laws. I mean,
Yeah.
if we want to be a Christian nation, can we please do the
All
Jubilee
debts are
laws?
gone after 70
All
years.
debt's gone after 7 years?
Yeah.
Oh, geez, Louise, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. Yeah. Like
So
really do it. Don't just sort of
don't
do it.
just say we want to be a Christian nation and then, you know, make women get pregnant all the time and have babies that no one's willing to help support.
Yeah.
All right. That's my other sermonette for today. Like, if you're really pro-life, be
Be
pro
pro-life.
from the
Yeah.
cradle to the grave.
Yep.
Make
Feed
sure that
them, make sure they have
employers,
educations. They're not going to get diet work. They're not,
right,
they have health care.
they have health care, make sure their employers pay a decent wage.
Yeah.
I mean, hello.
Yeah.
But also under Reagan, I remember this too, was a bunch of the union busting.
Yes.
So yeah. Now, some of that was the unions themselves were kind of not doing so great.
Yeah.
There was legitimate reason for concern, but you need someone who's going to, you need collective bargaining in this capitalistic system.
Yep.
But what really happens after 81 is you see that social mobility stops, because you really see the middle class shrinking, and the news was all over this. You know,
Mhm.
they're saying things about this, and but nobody's changing how they vote.
Mhm.
I was not able to vote at this point in time. You weren't even alive at this point in time.
Nope.
We've all inherited this system that once worked well for my grandparents
Mhm.
and okay for my parents, but it doesn't work for us.
Yeah.
And what the religious right wants to do is replace the entire system we have with something that they think will save America. And I'm not quite sure what they think they're saving it from.
Mhm.
Because when I read this stuff, it's not making life better for me as a woman. It's not making life better for my LGBTQ friends, family members. It's not making life better for my aging parents. It's not making life better for those of us who are paying for our health care. So I don't know what they think they're saving America from.
Mhm.
I don't know that it's ever defined. And what they do define is further along. And that's pretty scary. Again, if you are a friend or an ally of LGBTQ people, this is not good for them. So we get there to this XIV, and they begin to claim some ideas I really do not understand. First, he claims that cultural Marxism has marched through our institutions of government. Have you heard anything like this? Because
Yeah.
you've been in the right-wing circles that I have not.
Yeah. So cultural Marxism, it's a anti-Semitic dog whistle that goes back to the time of early fascism in America, around the time of Adolf Hitler.
Okay,
So,
so okay, for those of you who want to learn about early fascism in the United States, listen to Rachel Maddow's Ultra season 1 and 2, because she does a fantastic job of covering this history that I don't even know if I knew.
yeah, so they originally sort of started off as yelling against Jewish people, and they equated them to communist, and that was the way to dog whistle and be more appeal to more people with your anti-Semitic rants. And as we've progressed, communism, especially with the Cold War, has come to mean anything un-American. And so when you say cultural Marxism, you just mean a culture of things that are un-American. Jewish people is kind of slightly in there. There's a history of that, but it's very vague. I mean, obviously, Karl Marx has nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
And they really just mean addressing people how they want to be addressed,
Mm.
uh, pronouns, maybe not letting people make offensive jokes, be racist, be sexist, be homophobic. That's
So,
my understanding of cultural Marxism.
so from my perspective, if we had cultural Marxism, we would have free healthcare.
Yeah.
We would have guaranteed housing. We would have jobs that pay a living wage. To me, that's the heart of what Marx was talking about, wasn't it? That
Yeah.
you as a society make sure everybody has enough.
Yeah. This
And
sort of like collectivism that we see in tribal environment and hunter-gatherer society extended to the industrial era of capital and labor and industrialization and modern tech.
so it's not like the US has a laissez-faire, I didn't say it right because I don't speak French, capitalistic ideology, which is basically a free-for-all. This is like, it's a free-for-all. If you don't have a ton of money to lobby Congress and get rules in your favor, then you are not going to make it in capitalism.
Yeah.
In the United States. Let's be honest. That's how it's working now. Places like Germany, where we have family who live there, regulate the capitalism. And these regulations mean that you have to provide a certain amount of income for people who you hire. You have to make sure they're certified, that they have taken the right tests so that they are qualified to do the job. As an employer, you have to offer them 2 years of family leave. It's not always paid, but you have to guarantee that they can come back to work.
Now, how pro-life is that?
Exactly.
I mean, that talk about family values right there. We want you to be able to be there to take care of your kids, to raise them so they're not out on the street. They're not being indoctrinated in some public school. You're home with your kids. Come on.
Well, and it's really disheartening. So when I started working, I had 4 weeks off, which is
Yeah.
huge.
It
But
is
I work a
huge.
6-day week. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you factor a 5-day work week and 2 weeks off a year, that is actually more time off
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
than
yeah,
a
yeah.
6-day work week and 4 weeks off a year.
Yeah.
So my sister talked about how much time off her husband got. He got paid to work 13 months and he got basically 2 months off.
Hmm.
So the month of August, everybody was off.
Yep.
And then they would have a couple of weeks at Christmas, a couple of weeks at Easter, and I'm sitting here going, why do we work so hard? And the other thing is many of these European countries, you don't have to work 40 to 60 hours a week.
Yeah.
You're working 36 and that's full time. So if you want to complain about the work-life balance here, because I think as Americans, we are just all tired.
Yeah.
Because you can't make it.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's exhausting.
I think burnout is a pretty high rate of prevalence in our society in general. There's a lot of people.
There was a lot of people on the verge of burnout before the pandemic, and
Yeah.
the pandemic really did, because it's such a big social disruption that created a lot of, I mean, the quiet quitting was the name of something I've thought, oh, I've been doing that for years.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to the first installment on the 2025 plan. We didn't cover too much on the religious implications of this document in today's sessions. We will in future podcasts. But keep in mind what freedom means and what does the right mean by the original moorings. The Christian nationalists mistakenly believe that the original founders of our Constitution and nation wanted a quote-unquote Christian nation, but that is not held up when one reads the documents and conversations of our founders. No academically trained PhD in history will agree with the belief that the founders intended to make the U.S. a Christian nation. Instead, they wanted to keep religion private and allow people to worship without government dictating a national church or religion, and without religion dictating or controlling who was elected to office. This is important to remember when we talk about religious freedom. What does this term mean? Am I free to worship or not worship as I choose? Or is religious freedom about me being able to impose my religious views on others through legal and judicial means? The other thing to keep in mind is what rights do those who have been harmed by religion have if we move into a Christian nationalist state? Will you be free to remove yourself from religious dialogue, dogma, and worship?
We are always open to your feedback. If you would like to interact with us, you can reach us via email at condemnedhappy@gmail.com. We have two blogs. One is condemnedhappy.blogspot.com. The other is condemnedandhappy.wordpress.com. A reminder that Kim is an ordained pastor in the ELCA, the more liberal branch of Lutheran Christianity. The ELCA does not support or espouse Christian nationalism. We believe that God revealed to us in Jesus is a God of love and compassion who came to bring life and liberty to all.